The first thing you need to understand is this. When you feel that breath against your neck in an empty room, it is not your imagination. That sensation, the warm exhale, the subtle presence pressing close, is the ancient way shadows announce themselves. They don't come crashing in with chains rattling and doors slamming. That's for horror movies. The real ones, the ones tied to forbidden memory and hidden systems of control, reveal themselves with restraint. They whisper in air currents. They bend electricity. They make themselves known in ways you can dismiss, until you can't. The truth you were never meant to hear is this. You live inside a cage, but not the kind you can touch. It's psychological, built from silence and suggestion. Breath on your neck. Words through your speakers, signals cut and reconnected without your consent. That's not haunting, that's control, refined over thousands of years. Do you know why institutions across time, from the temples of Babylon to the Vatican, from secret societies to Silicon Valley, obsess over symbols of breath, voice, and spirit? Because breath is power. The ancients called it pneuma, ruach, prana, life force carried on air. Control someone's breath, their voice, their unseen atmosphere, and you control the man himself. The presence in that house, the one you feel behind you when no one is there, isn't random. It's not some lonely ghost wandering. It's part of a structure older than kings, older than nations. These things were built into the walls of civilizations. Every empire leaves behind layers of energy, coded instructions, psychological echoes meant to keep men docile. You aren't just feeling a spirit. You're brushing up against the invisible scaffolding that binds humanity. That puff of air on your neck, that's initiation. The system is testing you. Most men dismiss it, laugh it off, and return to their distraction. Yes, but if you're still here, if your skin remembers the way your muscles froze in that moment, then you've already stepped into a different category. The initiated, the watched, the ones they can no longer ignore. And once you recognize the pattern, you'll see it everywhere. In your home, in your technology, in the subtle manipulations of light, sound, and timing. You'll notice the interruptions, the whispers, the shifts in air pressure that make no physical sense. That's the hidden architecture revealing itself to you. Don't dismiss it. Don't joke about it. That would be your first mistake. This isn't about fear. It's about recognition. You've been marked. You've been told your house is safe. 4 walls, a roof, a door that locks. But security is an illusion. If something wants in, it doesn't come through doors and windows. It comes through the cracks of your attention. It enters through the gaps in what you believe is possible. That's how it slips behind you, how it breathes on your skin without a body to cast a shadow. Think of every civilization that has risen and fallen. Every one of them left behind ruins, stones, idols, scriptures, but also something less visible. Residues, energetic blueprints designed to keep their power alive long after the people were gone. That's why men throughout history spoke of curses clinging to temples, voices carried in tombs, whispers in libraries thought to be silent. The empire falls, but the manipulation remains. It hides in houses, in rituals, in the very air. And if you felt it, then you are living inside a node of that network. When you're sitting alone and the breath brushes your neck, it isn't random. It's calculated. It's a signal, a reminder that you are being observed, tested, weighed. They want to see how you respond, whether you panic, whether you deny, or whether you awaken. Because the awakened man doesn't just feel fear, he questions the source. And once you question the source, you begin tearing threads from the fabric they spent millennia weaving. Ask yourself, who benefits from you being afraid of your own home? Who gains when you second-guess every flicker of the light, every sound in the dark, every glitch in your devices? Fear doesn't only paralyze, it primes you. It makes you programmable. Entire religions, governments, and corporations have lived off this truth. Terrify the man in the night, then offer him a savior in the day. But here is what they don't expect. A man who refuses the savior, a man who refuses the offered cage, even if it promises safety. That's the crack in their system, and it terrifies them more than anything. So when the air shifts behind you, and your instincts scream that something unseen is there, Don't just fear it. Recognize it. Name it for what it is. An intrusion, a mechanism, a tool of control designed to keep you on your knees. Once you name it, it loses some of its power. And that, my brother, is the first step toward breaking the chains they buried in the walls around you. What you felt wasn't a haunting, it was surveillance. You weren't being scared for fun. You were being measured, and every reaction you had, every breath you took after that moment was part of the test. They don't need chains to bind you. They use subtler tools: fear, doubt, the sensation of being watched. Men break faster under invisible pressure than they ever would under iron shackles. That is why history's real masters never ruled by brute force alone. They ruled by engineering environments that shaped your very perception of reality. The Babylonians called it the breath of the gods. The Egyptians built chambers where the air was deliberately controlled to induce hallucinations. Priests stood unseen, whispering from the dark, and the initiate believed he was hearing divine command. The same game plays out now, only with technology replacing temples. That whisper from your speaker, that sudden silence in your devices, that is the updated version of the ancient ritual. You think it's random interference. It's not. It's design. Understand this. Your house is not yours. The walls remember things you don't. Materials hold impressions and frequencies can be pulled from them. Your devices are not neutral. They are channels. Every microphone, every signal, every error has the potential to open a crack between you and the structure watching. You felt breath because you were meant to. Someone, or something, wanted you aware. And not everyone gets chosen. Why you? That's the question you keep circling back to, isn't it? Why not your neighbor? Why not your brother? Why you? The answer is simple. You're still capable of waking up, and that makes you dangerous. Most men are too numbed by distraction to notice the subtleties. They drown in screens, scrolling endlessly, oblivious to the shadows standing over their shoulders. But when you pause, when you question, when you feel that presence and refuse to laugh it away, you mark yourself. You step into sight. The system begins to lean in, to press closer, to breathe harder against your neck. That's not just curiosity. It's recruitment. They're waiting to see if you break, or if you awaken. And once you awaken, there is no going back. The air will never feel the same. The silence will never be just silence again. Because once you hear the breath of the hidden, you realize you've been living inside their lungs the entire time. The ancients knew breath wasn't just survival, it was command. Every civilization that rose to power carved breath into its rituals, its languages, its systems of domination, not because they were spiritual, but because they understood psychology long before the word existed. Consider this. In Sumer, the earliest kings claimed the sacred decrees of order came from the breath of the gods. In Egypt, pharaohs were said to rule through the ka, the vital essence, passed like a current from ruler to subject. In Hebrew texts, ruach means both wind and spirit, the unseen force moving men. These weren't just poetic words. They were blueprints, codes that told the initiated, if you control the unseen atmosphere around a man, you control the man. You see, the empire didn't need to place a soldier in every room. They only needed the suggestion of presence. Whisper behind a curtain, a sudden chill, a flicker of torchlight in a temple hall. The initiate shivered, not knowing if it was divine or human. That uncertainty bound him tighter than chains. Now bring it forward. What has changed? Your temples are now screens. Your priests are now corporations. Instead of incense, you have electromagnetic fields. Instead of chants, you have notifications, frequencies, AI voices that listen even when you don't speak. The manipulation is the same, only updated for modern architecture. You sit in your room, the door shut, convinced you are alone. Then, a breath. A whisper through your device, a signal you can't trace, and you wonder if it's a glitch. It's not. It's the same ritual, thousands of years recycled. And when you felt that breath for the first time, you weren't being haunted. You were being inducted, tested by the very system that has survived the collapse of empires. This is why nations rise and fall, but the control never dies. It simply hides inside the walls of the next civilization. The unseen inheritance passed on, hidden in plain sight. The terrifying part, you're inside it now. The same structure the kings of Sumer used, the same architecture pharaohs swore by, the same manipulation woven into scripture, temple, and now into signal. You've already been touched by it, marked by it, and whether you accept it or not, it has already claimed you as a participant in its game. Because when the breath finds you, you don't walk away unchanged. You either fall asleep again, or you descend further into truth. You live in the age of noise, yet silence is their sharpest weapon. Think about it. How many times has your device gone quiet at the exact wrong moment? The call drops when you're about to speak truth. The microphone glitches when you're about to reveal something sensitive. The room goes still before you sense a presence behind you. You dismiss it as coincidence, but deep down you know better. Institutions don't just control you with rules and taxes. They control you by crafting atmospheres. They don't need chains. They need breath, subtle currents that push you toward obedience without ever commanding it outright. The voice of the algorithm breathing down your neck, steering your choices. The quiet hum of frequencies that affect mood and thought, unnoticed but effective. The sudden disconnection of your devices at the moment you feel most watched. Reminders that your environment is not yours, that even air is weaponized. This is how nations control populations without revolt. They don't police every corner, they police perception. They whisper through schools, media, pulpits, apps, not to shout, but to bend thought. Because if you can alter what a man feels in the room alone, you never need to touch him in the street. Why do you think surveillance states expand cameras, microphones, and biometric scans, yet still pour billions into psychological warfare? Because the real control is invisible. The presence you feel isn't always a ghost. It's the weight of centuries of institutional mastery pressing on your nervous system. They learned long ago that a frightened man seeks authority, and an isolated man accepts chains in exchange for the illusion of safety. But here's where you become dangerous, the moment you see it. When you no longer flinch at the breath but recognize it as programming. When you no longer assume the glitch is random but understand it as part of an ANS and system of induction. That awareness is the first fracture in their architecture. And they hate fractures. Because one man who sees through the veil is more dangerous than a million men still lost inside it. One man who refuses to bow to the whispers, who refuses to be shaped by the false breath, disrupts their centuries-old machinery of control. That man cannot be ruled the same way again, and the system knows it. Every empire has used the same blueprint: initiation through fear, control through ritual. What you're experiencing in your own home, the breath, the voice, the flicker of the unseen, isn't an accident. It's a ritual being performed on you without your consent. Think of it like this. Initiation has always required 3 steps. First, separation. The man is isolated, cut off from his normal world. That's why you only feel it when you're alone. The system waits until you're vulnerable, until you can't explain it away by pointing to someone else. Second, confrontation. The initiate is tested with a presence greater than himself, something he cannot control. In ancient temples, it was the masked priest in the shadows. In secret societies, it was the blindfold and the whisper in the dark hall. For you, it's the breath on your neck, the voice in your speaker, the silence that weighs heavier than noise. You are being confronted by the unseen, forced to react. The third step is transformation. The man either accepts the fear and submits, or he resists and awakens. That choice is the fulcrum on which your future turns. Most choose submission. They bury the memory, dismiss the experience, numb themselves with distraction, and in doing so, they enter the system as compliant participants. Their chains are invisible, but they carry them the rest of their lives. But a few, very few, choose the other path. They resist. They look straight into the ritual and call it what it is. They see the manipulation, the breath, the whisper, not as proof of weakness, but as proof of control, and therefore proof of an enemy. Those men change. They begin to see the same pattern in history, in politics, in religion, in every institution built to keep men bent under its weight. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The ritual you've been pulled into is older than your nation, older than your family. Bloodline. It's the same initiation that marked men in Babylon, in Egypt, in Rome, in every empire since. The walls remember it, the system repeats it, and now it has come to you. The breath is not random, it is the hand at your throat. The question is, will you bow to it, or will you rip it away and step into the fire they tried to hide from you? What happens to you in the silence of your room, the breath, the whisper, the invisible weight, happens to whole nations. You are not just dealing with an isolated haunting. You are looking at the operating system of civilization. Every empire understood this. If you want to rule a man, scare him alone. If you want to rule a people, scare them together. The ritual of initiation isn't limited to temples or secret lodges. It has been weaponized against entire populations, wars, pandemics, economic collapses, disasters, real or manufactured. These are mass initiations, the same 3 steps, scaled to millions. First, separation. Lock people in their homes, divide them from family, neighbors, friends, make them feel cut off. Second, confrontation. Confront them with an invisible force, plague, terror, collapse, that they cannot see but can always feel breathing down their necks. Third, transformation. Offer them a way out, but only through submission. Obey the priest, obey the ruler, obey the algorithm. Bend, and we will protect you. Resist, and you are destroyed. Look at history through this lens, and you will never see it the same again. The burning of villages in Babylon, the plagues of Egypt, the Inquisition in Europe, the endless wars of empire after empire. And yes, even now, digital isolation, constant surveillance, voices that listen and answer back when you never ask them to. Do you really think this is progress? No, it is the ancient ritual wrapped in modern clothing. You see, the breath behind your neck is not just in your house, it's in your culture, it's in the collective air we all breathe. That unease you feel at night is the same unease they program into millions during crisis after crisis. You are being inducted into something vast, an unbroken chain of psychological control systems that thrive on submission. And if you resist, you aren't just resisting fear or yourself. You are stepping into the position every awakened man before you was forced into, standing against the machine of fear while the rest of the world bows. That's why they need you afraid, that's why they whisper, that's why they breathe, because the moment you stop fearing, the entire system begins to fracture, and one fracture, one man who refuses, can spread faster than fire. You think walls protect you. You think stone and wood are dead material, but architecture is not neutral. Every line, every arch, every chamber has always been designed to shape the unseen atmosphere around you. That's why temples echo, that's why cathedrals rise impossibly high, that's why government buildings look more like shrines than offices. They are not built for comfort, they are built for control. The ancients knew that sound moves air, and air moves spirit. A whisper in the right chamber can feel like a voice from nowhere. A draft through a corridor can feel like a presence passing by. A vibration in the floor can make your bones tremble before your mind ever realizes what's happening. This is not superstition. This is engineering. Psychological architecture woven into stone. Why do you think rulers poured fortunes into building temples instead of homes? Because they weren't building for shelter, they were building machines of atmosphere that could generate awe, submission and fear. Walk into a medieval cathedral and tell me you don't feel small. Walk into a marble government hall and tell me you don't instinctively lower your voice. These places are designed to breathe on you, to press down invisible weight until you bow without thinking. Now look closer to home. Why do modern houses carry strange drafts that don't match the windows? Why do certain rooms always feel heavy, even when empty? Why do you feel the presence most at night, when the house is quiet? Because the walls themselves hold impressions tuned by design or by centuries of use. You are walking through layers of memory engineered to shape you. And when the breath brushes your neck in the dead of night, you're not just feeling a ghost, You're feeling architecture activated, the same architectural current priests once used in underground chambers, now hidden in ordinary homes, because you don't need pyramids anymore when every man lives inside a box that can serve the same function. Understand this, architecture isn't about safety, it's about atmosphere, it's about training your nervous system to submit to forces you cannot see. And when you sense that unseen presence in your house, it means the design is working exactly as intended. You're not safe inside those walls, you're captive. The stone temples have crumbled, but their function never died. It simply evolved. Where once they used echoing halls and carved chambers to shape your mind, now they use something far more invisible: frequency. Sound is air in motion. Frequency is breath extended across distance, and the men who rule understand this better than you do. They always have. Why do you think chants, hymns, and mantras were forced into ritual? They weren't just devotion, they were calibration. The repetition of sound tuned your body, bending your nervous system into alignment with the atmosphere they wanted. The initiate would leave the temple altered, not because he saw a god, but because his very biology had been rewritten through sound. Now look at your world. Do you think endless alerts, pings, vibrations, background hums are accidental? They're modern chants, modern bells tolling. Each tone slices into your nervous system, shaping your reactions. Pavlov didn't just discover conditioned response, he revealed the very backbone of how institutions already controlled mankind. Today, the algorithm is your priest, the frequency is your incense, and your submission is the ritual. Even silence has been weaponized, that moment when your device goes dead, when a signal cuts, when your speaker whispers something faint you can't decipher. Those are not glitches, they are deliberate gaps, like pauses in an ancient chant, engineered to trigger unease. A system that constantly breathes down your neck is a system that never lets you rest. And make no mistake, these frequencies don't just touch your ears, they ride the very air you breathe, vibrating in your lungs, your blood, your bones. That shiver you feel, that sudden heaviness when the room goes quiet, it isn't paranoia, it's resonance. Your body is being tuned, adjusted, pulled into alignment with an atmosphere not of your making. The ancients knew, said stone. Now they use towers, the chants of temples replaced by the hum of grids, the breath of the gods replaced by the breath of signals, unseen, constant, inescapable. And just like the breath you felt on your neck, you can deny it all you want. But your body already knows it's real. That's why it reacts before your mind catches up. That's why the hair on your arms stands up. You are being breathed into, whether you asked for it or not. And the question you must answer is this: will you keep inhaling their air, or will you finally learn to control your own? For centuries, men spoke of possession, spirits that climbed into the lungs, demons that whispered through the mouth, unseen entities that bent a person's will. Modern man laughs at this, calls it superstition, but here's the truth they never wanted you to realize. Possession isn't myth, it's method. Breath is entry. When you felt that warm exhale against your neck, it wasn't just a scare, it was an attempt to breach, to move from atmosphere into body, to turn you into an instrument instead of an observer. The ancients knew this. Why do you think exorcisms always focused on breath, on words, on commands shouted into the air? They weren't driving out an invisible monster. They were severing the psychological cords that had wrapped themselves around the man's nervous system. But here's the darker truth. Not all possession looks like screaming, writhing bodies. Most of it looks ordinary: controlled speech, controlled reactions, controlled thought. You don't need a demon to climb inside a man when institutions already know how to program him through fear, ritual, and constant atmosphere. That's why possession was always linked to authority. Priests declared it, rulers enforced it, and the people bowed. The breath on your neck is the same force. It is not just testing you, it is attempting entry, subtle, unseen. The whisper through your speaker, the glitch in your device, the silence pressing too heavy against your chest. Each one is a push, a probe, a way of seeing if your defenses will collapse. Because once you internalize the voice, once you breathe in the fear and let it shape your decisions, you are possessed, and you don't even need to convulse for the system to claim you. Possession is psychological slavery dressed as the supernatural, and entire populations live under it, controlled not by chains but by unseen breath, by voices that aren't theirs, by atmospheres that program submission. Now here's the line that separates the weak from the strong. The weak man accepts the breath, bends to it, lets it live inside him. The strong man rejects it. He recognizes the intrusion, names it, and refuses to let it occupy his lungs. He breathes on his own terms, and that's what they fear most. Because the moment you control your own breath, their possession breaks. The entire system trembles. Every word you speak is nothing more than shaped breath, air forced through your throat, sculpted by tongue and teeth. That's why the ancients obsessed over language, not because of meaning alone, but because of power. Words were not communication, they were command. To speak was to shape reality, to bind, to curse, to control. When rulers wanted dominion over men, they didn't just build armies, they built vocabularies. They carved laws into stone, recited chants, repeated decrees, until the air itself was saturated with obedience, and the people inhaled those words like oxygen, never realizing they were breathing in chains. Look at every institution of power, past and present, priests in cathedrals thundering Latin into the vaulted air, judges in black robes declaring verdicts in ritual cadence, politicians repeating slogans until entire nations chant them in unison. None of this is accidental. It is weaponized breath. You think you are listening. In truth, you are being programmed. Why do you think ancient kings demanded scribes record their words in stone, but still stood before crowds to speak them aloud? Because written law binds the body, but spoken law binds the spirit. The resonance of authority passing into your ear, vibrating your bones, sinking into your subconscious. Once it enters, it lingers. And the system has refined this weapon. Your algorithms, your media, your constant stream of voices filling every silent space. They are not there to inform you. They are there to occupy your breath, to leave no room for silence of your own, to leave no air that has not already been shaped by their voice. Think of it. How often do you repeat phrases that are not yours? Words lifted from headlines, from preachers, from officials. You think you are speaking freely, but your lungs have been colonized. Your breath carries someone else's script. That is possession on a global scale. And when you felt that whisper on your neck, that faint vibration through your speaker, that was not just a scare. That was the system reminding you, your air is not your own. Your voice is not your own. They are watching to see if you will carry their words, or burn them out of your lungs. The difference between a slave and a free man is simple: whose breath fills his body, his own or theirs. And the moment you answer that question honestly, your life will never be the same. Silence is never neutral. Silence is a weapon. You've been trained to think silence means peace, rest, or emptiness. But to those who understand control, silence is command. The pause between words is where power hides. Think of the courtroom. The judge falls silent after the sentence. That pause is heavier than the verdict itself. The accused hears the silence, feels it crush down on his chest, realizes his fate has been sealed. Silence confirms what words alone cannot. Think of the interrogator. He doesn't break you with endless questions. He breaks you by asking one, then waiting. The silence stretches, claws at your nerves, forces you to fill it with confession. That is silence as possession. And what of religion? Ancient priests did not only chant, they paused. The hush after the prayer, the silence in the temple was not emptiness. It was domination. It told you that even sound itself bowed to their authority. And when you inhaled in that stillness, it wasn't free breath. It was theirs, waiting to be spoken again. But the system has perfected silence. Look at modern power. Your calls go unanswered, your letters ignored, your cries drowned not in noise but in absence. That is the silence of bureaucracy, silence as erasure. You don't matter enough to receive words. That silence is louder than any denial. And when you felt that breath on your neck, wasn't it the silence afterward that terrified you more than the touch itself? That hollow space where no explanation came, where nothing moved, where you realized no human was near. That silence is what lingers. That silence is the hook through your ribs. Understand this. Breath is possession when spoken. Silence is possession when withheld. Together, they form the cage around your life. They don't just own the air you breathe, they own the pauses between your breaths. And if you want to escape, you must learn to endure silence without breaking, to sit in the void without rushing to fill it, to claim the pauses as yours, because only then will your breath belong to you again. But beware, the system knows those who try to reclaim silence, and it watches them most closely. Ritual is not about belief, it's about breath. Every chant, every oath, every prayer is nothing more than organized breathing disguised as devotion. The words are irrelevant. What matters is how the air is taken in, how it is released, and how silence is positioned in between. That is the mechanism. That is the chain. Think of the oath of allegiance. Soldiers, politicians, priests, mouths moving in unison, lungs forced into the same rhythm. It is not about loyalty to the nation or the god. It is about synchronizing breath. Once your breathing aligns with the system, you no longer own it. The collective has taken it. Consider the chant of monks, priests, or worshippers in endless repetition. The phrase is meaningless without the pacing. Long inhale, controlled exhale, silence, repeat. Do you see it? That is a cage built from breath. A cage that feels holy because you've been told it is. But strip away the sacred mask and what remains is simple, breath arranged into obedience. And what of the courtroom, the parliament, the secret lodge? Notice how they demand ritual silence before speech is permitted. They condition the lungs, the pauses, the release of air. To speak outside of the ritual is forbidden, punished. To breathe freely in such spaces is rebellion. Even funerals reveal this truth. The crowd doesn't weep freely. They are told when to hush, when to exhale in sighs, when to fall into silence together. Death itself is framed in ritual breath. The system ensures that even grief must be synchronized, controlled, possessed. But the darkest ritual is the one you never see. The quiet ones, the pauses in the mass, the spaces between oaths, the moment before the final word is spoken. That is where control becomes invisible. That silence isn't absence. It is ritual silence engineered to pierce deeper than sound. It carves obedience into the lungs. Understand this. Every ritual you have ever taken part in has stolen a piece of your breath. Piece by piece, ceremony by ceremony, you were emptied. And each silence you thought was holy, respectful, reverent, it was not. It was possession, a silent hand gripping your chest. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you truly exhaled without permission? Walls are not neutral. Architecture is ritual made solid. Every stone, every arch, every chamber is designed to hold breath in place. You think temples were built to honor gods, parliaments to uphold law, and cathedrals to inspire awe, but look closer, they are machines for silence. Step inside a cathedral. Notice how the ceiling rises into impossible heights. It forces you to look upward, to stretch your throat, to lift your breath into reverence. That is not spirituality, that is engineering. The echo of your cough, your whisper, your sob, it all comes back to you magnified. You are reminded that your lungs are not private. The building owns them. Courthouses do the same. The ceilings are high, the judge elevated, the benches long and aligned. The air hangs heavy, stagnant, so when you rise to speak, your breath feels fragile, weak, judged before the words even leave your mouth. Silence in such a place is not absence, it is imposed, it is ritual silence turned to stone. Secret lodges and chambers follow the same pattern. No window, no airflow, no escape. Breath recycled, stale, thick with ritual. Oaths spoken, there are not only promises, they are signatures of air, stamped into your lungs. Once given, they cannot be retracted. Even modern architecture obeys this ancient command. Think of government halls, lecture theatres, and boardrooms. Every seat faces one direction. Every breath funnels toward the center. One speaker controls the pace, the pauses, the silence. The building ensures compliance, and temples, always designed to steal breath. Incense thickens the air, forcing shallow inhales. Candles flicker, demanding stillness. Choirs lock your lungs into rhythm. Suddenly you believe it is faith guiding you. But no, your environment has already seized your chest. Ask yourself, who designed these chambers? Whose blueprints dictated the path of air, the hold of silence? Were they architects or priests of control disguised as builders? The house of worship, the court of law, the hall of power, they are not separate. They are copies of the same design. Machines that bend your lungs without you realizing. Machines that remind you of your place, below, submissive, silent. You thought you entered to pray, to learn, to seek justice. In truth, you entered to surrender your breath, and every exhale you left inside those walls is still there, trapped, echoing, feeding the silence of the system. Law was never written first on stone or paper, it was written in air. Before courts, before codes, punishment began with silence. Think of the earliest trials. The accused stood before elders, surrounded by witnesses, their lungs burned with the weight of waiting. To speak too soon was rebellion. To remain silent too long was guilt. Justice was measured in breath. When you inhaled, how you exhaled, whether your voice wavered. Punishment began before the verdict. Later came oaths. Swear by the gods, swear by heaven, swear by the sacred. Always spoken aloud, always binding the breath. The lie was not just dishonor, it was pollution of air, a crime carried on the lungs. To break an oath was to choke the divine atmosphere itself. Whipping, hanging, crucifixion, all were theater of breath. The body was not just broken, the breath was displayed, gasping, struggling, silenced. The crowd watched air escape as proof of guilt. Justice demanded lungs as spectacle. Even prisons are designed around air. No windows, no space, no flow. The condemned are denied the right to inhale freely. Air rationed as punishment, silence imposed as sentence. And yet the most dangerous punishment was exile, cast out from the group, cut off from shared breath. Alone, your lungs had no witness. Breath without recognition is suffocation of the soul. Now look at the modern courtroom. The judge commands silence. The gavel does not strike wood. It strikes your lungs. A signal. Inhale now. Exhale now. But do not speak unless permitted. The jury does not weigh only words. They weigh tone, cadence, the tremble of air leaving the accused. Verdicts still ride on breath. The law pretends to be about evidence, codes, and rights. But underneath, it remains what it always was. Control of silence, control of lungs, control of when you may breathe and when you must hold your breath. And here lies the secret. Justice was never about truth. It was about breath discipline. Those who could control their lungs under pressure were deemed righteous. Those who broke under silence, condemned. The first prisons were not walls of stone. They were pauses, silences forced upon the tongue. The first punishments were not chains, but breath withheld. Justice is not blind. Justice listens to air. Kings did not rule with swords alone. They ruled with air. The throne was always built on silence. When the king entered, the hall went still. Every man inhaled at once, and every woman held her tongue. That pause was not respect, it was domination of lungs. To breathe freely in the presence of power was treason. To cough, to whisper, to let out even a sigh, was rebellion against the throne. The king's word was law not because of armies, but because it carried in the air like thunder. His breath became decree, his silence became threat. When the king withheld his voice, the entire court suffocated with waiting. They leaned forward, trembling, not for gold or justice, but for the next exhale of command. Rulers understood this instinctively. They staged their authority as a theater of air. Trumpets blared before their arrival, forcing lungs to match their rhythm. Drums beat like an artificial heartbeat, reminding the crowd that their breathing no longer belonged to them. Every ritual, every coronation, every proclamation was designed to teach subjects one lesson. Your lungs are not yours. They are borrowed. Silence was the currency of monarchy. The longer a subject knelt without speaking, the deeper their submission. To kneel and remain silent was to suffocate willingly, offering breath back to the throne. Even executions were staged to demonstrate air's capture. When traitors were hanged, the king's men did not rush the spectacle. They slowed it. They let the condemned kick, gasp, and choke before the crowd. This was not merely death, it was pedagogy, a public sermon in which the body declared, "He who owns your lungs owns your life." And divine kingship made it absolute. Pharaohs, emperors, and monarchs alike claimed their breath came from the gods. To disobey them was to defy the very air that filled your chest. Priests stood beside them, declaring that the ruler. Religion did not invent faith, it invented breath control. Every ritual, every prayer, every chant was designed to seize the lungs. Think of it, before the priest speaks, there is silence. A sacred pause, a shared inhale. The congregation waits, breath locked, for the holy word to be exhaled into the air. That word is not simply sound, it is occupation. It enters ears, slides down into lungs, and sits heavy on the chest. Chanting is not random. Its rhythm matches the cycle of breathing. The rise and fall of voices in perfect unison is not just worship, it is synchronization. When hundreds breathe together, individuality dissolves. No one inhales on their own terms. Breath belongs to the ritual, to the god, to the priest who dictates the tempo. This is not prayer, this is respiratory surrender. Notice how prayer demands posture. Kneeling compresses the lungs, bowing bends the chest. Prostration presses the body into the earth until breath is shallow. These movements are not merely symbolic, they are mechanical. They remind you with every inhale that your air is not yours. It has been humbled, bent, reshaped into obedience. Fasting too is breath discipline. Hunger changes breathing. It weakens the lungs, slows the rhythm, makes each inhale feel costly. Religion calls this purification. In truth, it is control by deprivation. When you cannot eat, you cannot resist. You breathe lightly, desperately, and the priest's voice fills the emptiness. Sacred spaces were built with air in mind. Cathedrals rise high so that voices echo, overwhelming breath with sound. Temples burn incense, thickening the air, forcing lungs to labor in the name of holiness. Mosques spread wide so that collective breathing becomes a sea of rhythm, each inhale swallowed by the ocean of devotion. Air is architecture, air is scripture, and silence is the final weapon. The pause before aim. The stillness before the chant resumes. The priest waits, letting silence tighten around the lungs. The congregation cannot bear it, so they release breath on command. That moment cements the lesson. Your lungs are tethered to ritual. Religion sanctified obedience by disguising it as worship. To breathe in prayer was to surrender. To chant was to be chained in rhythm. To fast was to give your lungs to the temple. And here is the unspoken truth. The gods never needed your voice. They needed your lungs. Control the air, and you control the soul. Every war has been a war over lungs. Armies do not move by will alone. They move by rhythm. The drumbeat sets the breath. The chant of marchers aligns the lungs. Soldiers inhale together, exhale together, and in that forced unity, individuality is erased. A man does not march for himself. He marches as one lung of a larger beast. War cries are not mere intimidation. They are exhalations designed to purge fear from the chest. 1,000 men shouting in unison is not just noise, it is the synchronized release of terror transmuted into aggression. Breath becomes weapon, voice becomes blade. The enemy does not face soldiers, he faces a storm of lungs, each scream carrying the violence of collective air. Commanders know this instinctively. Why else the endless drills? Why else the chants, the calls, the cadences? These are not for morale. They are respiratory training. Soldiers are taught not to breathe for themselves, but to breathe in formation. No panic, no gasps, no ragged rhythm. Just controlled, measured air. A soldier who owns his breath can rebel. A soldier whose breath belongs to the march can only obey. Even the battlefield itself becomes an altar of air. Smoke thickens the lungs, dust clogs throats. The stench of death hangs heavy, forcing shallow, desperate breathing. In that suffocating atmosphere, the enemy is already conquered, his lungs too weak, his breath too broken. Victory is measured not by territory, but by who can still breathe. Trumpets, horns, war drums, these are not decoration, they are air-made command. A blast of sound forces lungs to adjust. Soldiers breathe to the signal, move to the breath. Without sound, chaos. With sound, order. The battlefield becomes an orchestra, every lung an instrument, every soldier a note in a deadly symphony. And then there is silence. The hush before the charge, that single suspended breath when both armies wait, and lungs trembling waiting for release. The commander does not shout "charge" to order movement. He shouts to break the suffocating silence, to give permission for lungs to release rage. That cry is not strategy. It is liberation of held air. Understand this. War is ritualized suffocation. From the march to the battle cry, from the smoke to the silence, every act bends lungs into submission. Nations are not defended by weapons. They are defended by lungs trained to obey. Kings never ruled by sword alone. Their true throne sat in the chest of their people. A ruler who controls breath controls obedience. Think of the king's speech. The crowd holds its breath as he begins, inhales when he pauses, exhales when he concludes. The people are not just listening, they are synchronizing their lungs to his rhythm. His words do not enter ears alone. They regulate the very act of breathing. He does not command armies, he commands air. Religious kings understood this best. Cathedrals and temples were designed not only to elevate the soul, but to trap the lungs. Incense fills the chamber, slowing breathing. Chants echo, forcing lungs to fall in line with holy rhythm. The faithful do not breathe freely, they breathe on command. A congregation inhaling and exhaling together becomes a single organism, and in that organism the king, God's chosen, is the heart that dictates the lungs. Consider coronations. Trumpets blast, choirs erupt, incense rises, the crowd roars. Every sound is a manipulation of air. Every lung in the kingdom surrenders itself in that moment. Breath is given to the crown willingly. This is why monarchies endure not through violence alone, but through ritualized respiration, festivals, parades, prayers, all designed to unify the nation's breath under one will. Even taxation has its roots in lungs. The ancient hearth tax was not about fire, it was about counting how many lungs lived under a roof. Each breathing body was currency. Each exhale was wealth. The king's ledger was not gold, it was the number of lungs he owned. When rebellion rose, rulers knew the first battle was not on the field, but in the lungs of the people. Rebels sang songs to reclaim their breath. They marched to their own cadence, not the crown's. To suppress them, rulers banned gatherings, outlawed chants, silenced drums, not because of words, but because of rhythm. Whoever controls the collective breath decides the fate of the kingdom. Understand this truth. Kings were not men with crowns, they were men with the power to dictate air. The sword kills bodies, but the control of lungs enslaves nations. The throne is not built of stone, it is built of breath. The church learned quickly what kings had only begun to glimpse. Breath is not merely human, it is divine. To own it meant to own the soul. Step inside a cathedral. The ceilings stretch upward, forcing your lungs to work harder, as though the very act of breathing requires submission. Incense burns, not just for fragrance, but to thicken the air, slowing inhalation, deepening exhalation, entrancing the body into reverence. The choir does not sing freely, it chants in measured cadence, each note designed to trap the lungs of the faithful. When hundreds breathe together on command, individuality dissolves. The crowd becomes one body, and that body belongs to the church. Silence was their deadliest weapon. The priest pauses in the sermon, and in that pause, the congregation holds its breath without realizing. Suspense forces obedience. Silence is not empty, it is command. By regulating when people could speak, sing, pray, or remain silent, the church turned lungs into instruments of worship. Confession was no different. A sinner enters, breath quickens, chest tightens. The priest listens not only to words but to the rhythm of fear in the lungs. Absolution is granted only after the penitent has exhaled guilt into the air between them. Breath becomes currency, traded for forgiveness. Monks in cloisters practiced breath control rituals, disguising them as prayer. Hours of chanting aligned their lungs with divine rhythm until their very bodies were enslaved by liturgy. In that rhythm, obedience was absolute. To disobey the church meant to breathe differently, and to breathe differently was heresy. Even death itself was seized by breath. The last exhale of the dying was said to belong to God. Priests rushed to the bedside to catch it with prayer, as though the soul itself could be guided or stolen through the air, leaving the body. In this way, the church did not simply govern should and lives. It claimed the very transition from breath to silence. Understand, salvation was not about morality. It was about air. The church owned the rhythm of life, the hush of silence, and the gasp of death. The faithful did not just give their gold, they gave every breath, willingly. This was not worship, this was possession. Behind the gilded doors of the church, hidden from the trembling masses, another rhythm of breath pulsed, a rhythm not of worship, but of initiation. Secret brotherhoods thrived within the very institution that preached obedience. They knew the chants, the silences, the incense-laden air, but they twisted them into keys that opened forbidden states of awareness. To the common worshipper, breath was prayer. To these initiates, breath was a weapon, a stairway to power, a lockpick for the gates of perception. They would gather in cloisters at night, no bells, no choirs, only silence and lungs. One novice would be blindfolded, forced to match his breath to the rhythm of the circle, too slow, and his chest ached with burning fire. Too fast, and he risked collapsing. The test was cruel but precise. To master breath was to master the body. To master the body was to master fear. The ritual of the suspirium was whispered among them, a practice where the initiate was suffocated with incense until his lungs begged for release. At the brink of collapse, the blindfold was torn away, and he was forced to inhale the first clean breath in unison with the brotherhood. That single breath bound him forever. To breathe with them was to belong to them. But it went deeper. These brotherhoods believed that each controlled breath carved pathways in the soul, leading to visions not sanctioned by the church's scriptures. They reported seeing figures in the smoke, guardians, watchers, perhaps demons, entities that lived between the inhale and exhale, entities that traded secrets for loyalty. The irony was bitter. The church that enslaved the masses with orchestrated lungs also bred an elite that used those same techniques for liberation, or for darker power. Every whispered prayer, every silent pause, every measured chant was not only devotion, it was training. Training that, in the hands of these subtiyid, Ise brotherhoods, became initiation into the unseen. The faithful below gave their breath as tithe, the brotherhood above claimed breath as dominion. And somewhere in that divide, truth suffocated. When breath moved from cloisters into courts, the game shifted. Kings and rulers discovered what the brotherhoods already knew: control a man's lungs and you control his will. It began with ceremony. A king's entrance was no longer marked by sound, but by silence. An entire hall of nobles, soldiers, and servants would hold their breath as he stepped forward. The air itself bent to his presence. Then, with a single gesture, he inhaled, and only then were they permitted to breathe again. Power was no longer just seen. It was felt in the chest, burned into the lungs of every subject. Generals adapted the technique for war. Soldiers trained in synchronized breathing before battle, not merely for discipline, but for domination. Entire battalions inhaled and exhaled as one body, the rhythm of lungs forging a unity stronger than steel. Enemies reported terror at the sight, not from weapons, but from the eerie silence of an army holding breath, waiting to unleash itself like a storm. Courts and councils were no different. Negotiations were not decided only by words, but by breath. The one who could remain calm in suffocating silence, who could let his rivals gasp while he appeared composed, always won. Breath became currency, invisible yet absolute. The church had weaponized prayer. The brotherhoods had turned it into initiation. But rulers twisted it into domination of entire nations. No decree, no sermon, no army was needed if the very act of inhaling and exhaling was controlled by those in power. And in that suffocating silence of courts and armies, the masses outside learned a bitter truth. They no longer breathed for themselves. Their lungs served kings, priests, and hidden brotherhoods. The air was theirs, but the right to inhale it had been stolen. The age of swords was passing. The age of controlled lungs had begun. The dungeon became the final stage of breath's corruption. Walls of stone did not just confine the body, they confined the air. Torches burned the oxygen low, chains forced the chest tight, and interrogators learned a cruel science. Nothing breaks a man faster than stealing his breath. Inquisitors abandoned the rack and whip for subtler methods. A cloth soaked in water pressed over the mouth, a basin inverted over the head, a rope knotted around the ribs. No blood was spilled, yet screams tore through the silence. A man's faith, his secrets, his pride, everything collapsed when his lungs begged for air. The prisons of Europe and the torture chambers of empires were laboratories of suffocation. Monarchs and priests justified it as purification, claiming that stealing breath cleansed the soul. Victims understood the truth. Breath was the only thing they still owned, and even that was being taken. Whispers spread of executioners who could kill without blade or fire, leaving no wound. They simply pressed their palm over the prisoner's mouth, leaned in close, and waited until the lungs gave out. Death by stolen breath carried no proof, only silence. Such men were feared more than swordsmen, for they turned the most ordinary act, breathing, into terror itself. Worse still were the experiments. Some captives were forced into chambers where air was pumped in, then pulled out, in rhythms meant to mimic prayer or chanting. Hours passed until the victim could no longer tell if he was breathing by choice or by command. Their lungs were trained like animals. Some emerged broken, unable to inhale unless ordered. It was here that the Brotherhood saw the perfection of their craft. From cloisters to courts, from kings to inquisitors, breath had become both ritual and weapon, no longer sacred, no longer natural. It was property. To inhale was permission, not freedom. The dungeon taught it rulers and priests the darkest lesson of all. You don't need chains on a man's body if you can chain his lungs. From the darkness of the dungeon, the Brotherhoods carried their craft into the open world. What was born as ritual and perfected in prisons now spread like a hidden plague across continents. They were no longer monks or inquisitors. They became physicians, soldiers, and scholars, slipping into every place where breath mattered. Armies were their first target. A soldier who mastered his lungs could march longer, strike harder, and silence fear. Drill masters taught formations not only of blade and shield, but of inhale and exhale. Entire battalions moved like a single chest, expanding and collapsing as one organism. The enemy thought they fought men. They were really fighting lungs trained into a weapon. In secret, Generals borrowed the dungeon's cruelty. Captives were suffocated not for pain but for information. A cloth, a bucket, a rope, tools more reliable than steel. Death without blood left no trace, no martyrdom, only whispers. Armies that wielded breath as a weapon gained fear as their greatest ally. At the same time, the Brotherhood slipped into medicine. Physicians spoke of humors and fluids, but behind closed doors they studied respiration like scripture. Some learned how to slow a pulse until life seemed gone, only to revive the body minutes later. Others experimented with herbs and fumes that could snatch breath from lungs without leaving a mark. These men became trusted healers by day and silent assassins by night. Even the sciences were touched. Early alchemists, obsessed with the invisible element that filled the chest, treated air as a substance to be weighed, divided, and owned. They claimed it was not God's gift but matter, and matter could be controlled. With each experiment, breath became less a mystery of the soul and more a tool of power, and the Brotherhoods wove themselves through all of it. In battlefields, in apothecaries, in laboratories, tool. Hey, whispered the same creed. The one who governs breath governs men. By the 16th century, their reach stretched across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Some sects disguised themselves as ascetics, others as scientists, but their essence remained unchanged. Breath, once sacred, had become a global currency of control. Nations rose on it, kings feared it, and common men never knew they were ruled by it. The Brotherhoods had moved beyond cloisters and chains. They were now the architects of power itself. The Brotherhoods did not vanish with the passing centuries. They evolved. By the time the modern age began, their ancient science of breath had seeped into the very institutions people trusted most. What was once whispered in stone chambers beneath monasteries was now embedded in military codes, medical practices, and even schools. Armies carried the Brotherhood's discipline into drills. The synchronized inhale and exhale that once trained monks to endure torture became marching cadence, shouted commands, and battle cries. Entire regiments were taught to breathe as one, an invisible chain binding soldiers together in obedience. The soldier who mastered his lungs was the soldier who would not break in the chaos of war. Nations built their power on this truth, never admitting where it came from. In medicine, breath became the cornerstone of life and death decisions. Hospitals turned the Brotherhood's cruel experiments into tools of authority, the stethoscope listening for rhythm, the respirator deciding who lived, the mask dictating who could breathe freely. Behind the language of science, the same old control lingered. To govern the breath was to govern the body, and those who held the instruments of respiration held the soul itself. Education was not spared. Schools quietly trained children to breathe in rhythm with bells, whistles, and commands. Sit, stand, speak when told. Entire generations were molded not only by words but by the unnoticed manipulation of lungs, obedience etched into the body with every controlled breath. And surveillance took its place. The Brotherhood learned that the breath reveals everything: fear, lies, guilt, even rebellion. What they once sensed in a dungeon's shadows is now measured by machines. Polygraphs, biometric scanners, thermal cameras, all tracing the unseen patterns of respiration. Your secrets are written in the air, leaving your chest, and the institutions built upon the Brotherhood's knowledge know how to read them. Centuries of secrecy had transformed into systems of control. The chains of the dungeon became the protocols of the modern state. The silence of the cloister became the discipline of the barracks. The suffocation of the captive became the science of the clinic. And the Brotherhood, though hidden, still breathes through them all. The final truth remains unchanged. The one who governs breath governs men. And if you think you own your breath, if you think each inhale is yours alone, you are already under their hand. The Brotherhood never disappeared. They simply learned how to wear new faces. Today they no longer hide in catacombs or whisper behind cloister doors. They stand in daylight dressed as officials, generals, scientists, and healers. Their symbols are no longer carved into monastery walls but etched into the contracts you sign, the laws you obey, the machines you cannot escape. Think about it. When you join the army, they break you with breath. When you enter the hospital, they keep you alive, or silence you, with breath. When you sit in a classroom, the rhythm of bells dictates when you inhale freedom and when you exhale obedience. Every major institution you trust is built upon the same foundation. Control the breath, control the body, control the soul. Governments learned to weaponize it, militaries refined it, medicine sanctified it, education normalized it, and surveillance perfected it. You call it discipline, health, learning, security, but it is the same old doctrine of power, perfected by men who believed no one should breathe freely unless permitted. The tragedy is not that this knowledge survived. The tragedy is that you never saw it. That each inhale you believed was your own was already measured, counted, and predicted long before you exhaled it. You were told freedom lives in speech, in wealth, in choice. But the Brotherhood knew the secret. Freedom lives in the lungs. That is why they buried it, why they disguised it, why they twisted it into tools of authority. So the question becomes simple. Are you breathing, or are you being breathed? Every sigh, every gasp, every controlled inhale, do you own it, or is it owned for you? The walls may no longer be stone, the chains may no longer rattle, but the prison is still here, and you are still inside it. The Brotherhood survives, and as long as you draw breath, so does their power.